Okay, now we're doing part two of Celts, Vikings, and the Druids were Sumerians. And so it's really kind of a debunk at the same time as a total bunk because, like, I guess, real history and a few other things, they're actually showing real history. They just keep interjecting somehow. One of them was black somehow out of it. But now we're looking at the ancient Celtic rites of someone dying and 3 days later resurrecting and so on. And it had to do with the death and burial rites that they had back then and how you'd put somebody up on a dais, let the birds eat them and do things like that, that turned into an entombment type thing that almost simultaneously start happening in Kurgan burials and then spreads down. You see it in ancient Egypt and so on. Of course, Egypt found that they naturally mummified bodies and then started working out from there. And we still carry this on today, and this concept of black going with death at funerals, and also people being embalmed and so on, where it leads to that. But what we're looking at here is Kukulkan, and how that really seems to correlate with Aztec gods of the sun and Kukulkan and the people that had come there from before that was their primordial gods.
On their death would rise again and be reborn. So the interesting thing about the sun god Kukulkan of the Celtic people is that the same sun god Kukulkan to the Celtics was called Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs.
Well, Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl are looked as being somewhat synonymous, I believe, in the things that they had the same kind of primordial concept to each other. It was almost like we have the Abrahamic religion and its variants on the theme of people's thoughts on it. Maybe something, maybe not even that variant from each other.
And if we look at this artifact found in Syria 3,300 years ago, in the same location where we know the Cushites were 3,300 years ago,
right,
we see
these
that
Caucasians.
This artifact resembles the artifacts of the ancient Olmecs. So again, we have
not so much. Although you can say that the ear holes get big and stuff, but that's a thing that you find in a whole lot of people. In fact, Buddha had these elongated ear holes and stuff, and there was the big-eared people that I've done in one of my videos too that talked about these people that had littler ears or attached bottoms of the ears, and then people that had big non-attached bottoms and would put these ornaments into them, and the variants of the two. But in the idea, we found out they're both Caucasians too, just like you see today and so on. But yeah, and
the connection between the Cushites, who were Sumerians, who were also known as the Celts, and the people known as the Olmecs and the Aztecs of South America. So here,
well, she tries to make that connection, but what I've made is connections of the Phoenicians having made it across before in ancient Phoenician writings in North America, Central and South America, and I've shown it in a couple of videos, in the ancient style of reed boats that come from Sumeria into Egypt, which shows you that connection. But then again, there are those exact same reed boats somehow mimicking that exact same style found up in the mountains of Peru and different places where you see these people using the same concept. And then if you look at the ancient ruins that are there, they're very much in question and quite often on alien programs and so on like that, which is kind of odd. But, and of course, iron and things like that. She's fixing to go into a few things. Let's look.
We have some more Celtic artifacts like knives used for cutting sheep's hair. We have some Celtic necklaces that actually resemble ancient Egyptian necklaces.
There's a lot of beadwork which is very much the same, and what's odd is some of the beads that go into Egyptian necklaces have been found to be Faience beadwork that don't come from Egypt. And in one of my videos I've shown where in a Finnish burial way up in Denmark area there is Egyptian beadwork, and whenever they looked at it, the guys said they either took an Egyptian necklace up there, or this shows where they had helped and were together with these people and helped make a necklace for this king. And it seems to come from the exact same workshop as the ones of the Egyptians, which is a strange connection. I've got that video. Look it up in my vids. Egyptian Denmark connections, I believe it's called, or Scandinavian connections. Anyhow, yeah, so more connections between these primordial Caucasians. Let's look.
So the ancient historian Diodorus writes in 50 BC
Uh-huh.
that the Celtic artisans working in gold not only created jewelry but also produced vessels and display weapons, often in solid gold.
Yes.
Using an enormous amount of raw materials, Greeks and Romans often remarked on the Celts' almost excessive taste for gold and their habit of wearing shiny ornaments on all occasions.
They were more adorned and they thought it was almost gaudy. But then they turned it around and changed it and tried to throw it in their faces. Other things, there's a lot of dissension back then, of course, and the Romans wanted to rule the entire world, so we had that problem with there. But you look at things like the old Sutton Hoo burial and things, and you can kind of see what they were talking about. Now, these people had elaborate stuff that you see Scythians having, and a lot of gold work that you see. Pretty intricate. Anyhow, let's continue.
The number and wealth of the Celtic deposits in Europe certainly were remarkable. So here we have Celtic gold coins dating to the 3rd and 4th century BC.
Rarely seen.
So 2,400 years ago, the Celts had their own currency. Now the interesting thing is that it says that some of the designs of the coins were full of meaning, containing surprise elements, especially on coins from Amorica. So Himlico.
But hold on, you just took that out of there. You stopped before you finished. So especially in coins coming from Amorica, human heads with lines coming out of their foreheads, chains of dots ending in little floating heads, contorted figures, heads with monstrous eyes, or human-headed horses with imaginative harnesses and stuff. And it's just bad art. Look at these things, and you can tell that it was somewhat bad art, but it contains horses and things at this time, right? Way back when, and what they contained in these beams of light coming out their forehead type of thing, which looks very much like a halo or the emanation of light. Let's continue.
Full of meaning, containing surprise elements, especially on coins from Amorica. So Himlico writes in the 5th century BC, so 2,500 years ago, he writes about the Celts. And
hold on, before she puts this out, because she's going to bypass it. Himlico, an early 5th century BC Carthaginian navigator, which would have had somewhat Phoenician roots still at this point, instructed to reconnoiter the Atlantic coastline in the seas of northern Europe, giving terrifying descriptions of those places, which were later reworked by the Latin poet Avienus. And this is where they showed you, and I've showed you before in ancient maps, where they show you dragons and beings out in the water, and hey, you don't want to go there, and that type of crap, and so on. But let's see what Himlico says.
He says that he took 4 months to cross the ocean from the Pillars of Hercules, and he came to the coast of ancient Amorica.
She can't read that word there, so and I'm just going to go ahead and take a shot at it here, but they said they took 4 months to cross the ocean from the Pillars of Hercules, and it didn't take that long as you went in the right time of year to cross to the Americas. It took a lot less time than that for Thor Heyerdahl to do it in a reed boat. But to go to the Oes Traminis, either the islands off the coast of ancient Amorica or the British Isles. So they had come all the way across already before on a sea that was sluggish and blocked with weed. So they went through the Sargassum seas, in danger on the shoals and surrounded by sea monsters, which were probably them seeing something like either whales or them seeing, which they should have been familiar with, or maybe manatees and so on. He said that they were west of the Pillars of Hercules, and it had the absence of wind and a persistence of fog, and what he got caught in was the doldrums. If you've ever heard any stories about that, you have to go across in the right way. If you don't go across in the right way, it takes you into an area that the wind pretty much calms in a lot of spots. So you want to wing it up high, or you want to wing it down low. And like whenever Thor Heyerdahl winged it down low, it actually whips you right into South America and the British Isles. If you miss the tip of South America or the outstretch of Brazil there, you'll actually run right up into the Caribbean. If you miss that, you're going to cleave either inside or outside of Florida or hit it directly on. So it's a pretty easy thing. And you will see that shoreline. It will come up as long as you can make it long enough to make it to there. And this shows you 5th century BC. Okay, let's keep going.
So in 50 BC, Diodorus also writes about the Celts and their gold and how they mine and use their gold. So he describes that the Celtic people mine their gold the same way that the African people still mine their gold to this day.
Actually, I don't think anywhere in here he mentions of Africa doing it this way, but he talks about people do this work collecting rocks and breaking up the dust of the rocks, moving the earthly part, and then by repeated washing, and then they melt the rest in furnaces. The way their gold is used in the ornaments, not only for women but for men as well, for they wear bracelets on their wrist, arms, and also massive gold collars. And so it shows you these people are kind of hooked up here pretty good. But it doesn't have anything to do with Africa necessarily, except for, yeah, there's a lot of gold in Africa today, and people smelt a lot of gold, but yeah.
And he says that they make bracelets for women and for men, and they wear these bracelets on their wrists and their arms, and they make massive solid gold collars to wear around their necks, and they make fine finger rings and even gold breastplates. And it says the inland Celts make an unusual and surprising use of their temples. In sanctuaries and sacred enclosures in this area, a lot of gold is openly displayed as offerings to the gods. And although the Celts have an excessive love of money, none of the natives dare to touch the gold in the temples because of religious fear.
Not really maybe out of religious fear, but out of the idea that they had put it there in the first place, that it was a sign of their coming together. It's kind of like Fort Knox, if you will, or something along that line in some ways. It's the sign of a people's wealth, and they had respect for it, and these people could be trusted not to go and steal crap. But he does mention that right out in the open in these temples, they have a lot of gold. And after mentioning this to people, guess what happens to these people and how they go and maul them over and take all their gold.
So the Celtic tradition of filling the temples with gold for the gods as offerings is an ancient practice of the Mayan, Aztec, and the Incas of South America as well.
And the ancient Sumerians and a lot of the Caucasians of this entire area, Scythians and so on, and then burials are seen with a lot of this wealth put with them too. We can only find with these Caucasians in the way that they do things to this day.
So here's a 2,600-year-old Celtic artifact found in Switzerland. And it shows what is called Artemis, the Greek goddess. But Artemis, the Greek goddess, and the Greeks in general made gods that they thought were the equivalent to the Egyptian gods.
Yeah, there's a lot of equivalency going on there, but then also they had a Proto-Indo-European origin too, so it's really not necessarily a theft or an equivalency. It's more of a variation on a theme, and Artemis and Diana are the same character that you have, and it goes along with like Sekhmet sometimes, where you have a lion goddess that goes on, and that's in ancient Egypt, and then the ideologies that go on with them. In a lot of my videos I've shown recently where the gods of ancient Greece and Greece and Rome were not the gods of just right that little spot there or just on this one little mountain, Olympus, but they were the gods of everywhere. Adonis and so on all carries from this all primordial land, from the entire Middle Earth, if you will, and the ancient gods of those people.
And Artemis is the equivalent to the daughter of Ra, who is Sekhmet. And Sekhmet is shown sometimes with the head of a lion.
And in Sumerian, it's his daughter Inanna, which is Diana. And she was at first a goddess of love, but she became a goddess of war. She was the war goddess. She shows that ballerina effect when she takes him to war, too. It's the same symbology, and she had the wings that are seen with Isis. Sumerians predate this somewhat, but this concept carries all between primordial people, that she's just giving it away here, or all these primordial Caucasians. She just wants desperately them to have something to do with black people, I think.
So here we have other Celtic artifacts that have been found in Europe. And as you can see, these Celtic artifacts resemble the artifacts that can be found in ancient Sumer, or the land of Ur.
Yeah.
And here's another Celtic artifact. This one was found in Italy.
And that's a pointed hat, and she won't go into that or anything, but that also shows a lot to do with these Scythians and the hats that we show, and they show in the ancient art that goes there. And again, she bypassed the idea of Ur and Uruk, and now but we have echoes of Uruk here, but Ur and Ur of the Chaldees, and their ancient stories that they have, and everybody talks about them, and now they had so much ancient knowledge and so on. And the Ur people, the ancient Sumerians, and Abraham was from Ur, and so we have that around again. But then there's a harness ring here from around the Paris area that's shown, and there's a harness ring from around Ur, only they're a few thousand years apart, but they show to be almost the same type of things.
Celtic artifact to the left that was found in Paris is very similar to the artifact to the right, which was found in the land of Ur, or the land.
And now when we talk about this too, we're looking at a primordial god here and a bull, and he brings that, and he has these bird effigy with them, and the Shemsu Hor concept. But let's continue.
And of the Sumerians.
Sumerians.
So in 58 BC, Julius Caesar, the Roman general, writes about the Gauls, or the Celtics.
Yes.
And he says that in all of Gaul, there are only two classes of men who count for anything and are considered. For the common people are like slaves. They can do nothing on their own account and are never consulted.
I think that that's the way it is in most democratic societies. We are in a way consulted, and I think we give ourselves up to this. The Caucasians are very willing to do this, to where we set people that we know and trust, hopefully, in these positions of power, and then we basically empower them to help run the thing with the ideals that we all have. Sumeria had a two-part Congress type situation too. And part of it was the more richer nobility, others was the farmers, and so they had to get together on ideas for the people. It's a concept that led into the democracy that we carry today, and it comes from Caucasians.
To them crushed by either debts or taxes, or by the injustice of more powerful men. And he writes that
says, well, she's going to pass it, so most of them are crushed either by debts or taxes or by the injustice of more powerful men. And you can see we fight against this to this day, and the amount of too much taxes and the Boston Tea Party and all these things that have happened due to the fact that too much out of our dollar is being taken and frivolously spent in a lot of ways, and so things need to be kept in check. But they handed themselves over into servitude to nobles who have assumed the same rights over them as masters have over slaves. And this is the concept of indentured servitude, where somebody would go up under a noble, and that noble would help to raise this person up and give them a head start in a kicking, but you would be working for this noble during that time. He needs help, you need assistance in getting up into that point, and it's kind of like a Padawan, if you will, type situation, but done in a more master situation, so you have respect for this person, the schoolmaster, the school marm, and so on, and type things that we have to this day. There's a lot of rebellion nowadays and stuff, and so we can see our rebellion of today going against this concept that's still very much accepted in many lights.
The other two classes are druids and equites, or knights, or barons. So the former preside over the religious matters and see to the public and private sacrifices and expound doctrine. The latter are responsible for military affairs.
So it kind of sounds like the same thing that they had before with kings, barons, and so on, living like that, and then the military leaders. And this is kind of the way that Rome was too, although military leaders quite often became the ones of prominence. But don't we find that in America too, where George Washington was the same way, wasn't he? And so on. Now we have generals and Eisenhower and these people that we've put in these positions. Yeah, no, we've done that definitely. It's not always there, and right now we're trying to find a common man, and we found him in Donald Trump, somebody that knows how to do business, and he stepped in and went, no, no, look at y'all. Yeah, he's easily seen, and he's having a lot of friction. Yeah, look at all what he's done and how amazing it's done, how easily it was to fix some of the mistakes that when roads we've been going down just by what he's done, and he's having full opposition constantly. For the first 2 years here, they've been trying to get him on some Russian collusion that's bullshit, but that's a whole different topic. It has nothing to do with these ancient Celts, but let's continue here where you can see ancient artwork and stuff and flagons, and here's that Orion type thing. But
So the people known as the Druids were actually Celtics as well.
yeah,
Druid was a term used for the Celtics, who were shamans or high priests, poets, philosophers, physicians, judges, and prophets.
pretty much, yeah.
So something else I want to point out about the Druids is that the Druids held the mistletoe tree in high regard. And
Mistletoe's not a tree. Mistletoe is a spore that grows onto a tree, and they loved it as long as it had to do with the oak trees and the sacred oaks. And these were people that had sacred groves and so on. And these oaks they used to make buildings and stuff out of, and their boats and things like that. Whereas in Lebanon and over in Sumeria, it's actually cedars and the giant Lebanon cedar forest that they had used.
and this plant was used by the magicians, and they considered nothing more sacred than the mistletoe tree. So again, we can see another connection between the early traditions of Christianity and the ancient traditions of the Celtic people of Europe.
Yeah, mistletoe had a symbology with it too. You can see that this ancient sacred grove somehow gets transferred, usually from bird poop and stuff. Ha ha ha! But that's sacred birds too. Watch out now. Now these birds drop this poop on, and then this starts a new growth in an area. This starts something new attached to it. It's strange that you have a plant living off another plant, that you have one off another like that you have a separate grafting that you can do nowadays, where you can take a apple tree and whatever, and you can chop off one of the limbs and graft it right, and you can put oranges sticking off an apple tree and so on. And they've made these multi-trees now and stuff like that. That's a genetics type thing, but that's one of the reasons they looked at it as being sacred. There's a lot of symbology that goes with that too, and the idea of mistletoe too. But let's continue.
So the Greeks referred to the territory of the Celts as Kaltoi, and the Romans referred to Celtic territory as Galli. Strabo is the one who writes the most about the Celtic people.
Now, Gali is like the Gala priest, as I talked about in the first part there, and that has to do with, well, Jesus was said to have been a Nazarite or a Gala priest. So we have that in Galatia and so on, and who the biblical people were in these 12 tribes of distant, broke out people that were the Proto-Indo-Europeans, really, that we were talking about. It never really was about what the Bible has tried to make it into seeming like it's about necessarily. Let's continue.
This is where we get most of the information about the territory and the land of the Celtic people. And he also writes what happened to the Celtic people. He says that the secret lakes and ponds were filled with gold offerings that the indigenous people would throw into the lakes, offering to the gods, just like the ancient people of South America did as well. So
well, and you can see that also in bogs, they found bog bodies and so on. There were ancient sacrifices and so on. And whenever they did this, they knew that they had riches that were at the bottom of these lakes and so on, that people would go and throw riches into. And there's more cultures than just them and the Aztecs that did this type of thing. The Proto-Indo-Europeans did this in quite a few places. It's mentioned in a few things, and I could bring up one and go to show it to you now, but let's just go on. But they show you that they have these things shaped of millstones, beaten silver, ingots. Romans took control of the area. They sold the lakes for revenues at public auction because they knew they had riches in them. But let's go.
the Romans took control of this area. They sold the lakes at auctions. And the Romans even plundered the temples that were filled with sacred offerings to the gods.
Oh, just like I said.
Strabo also describes how the ancient Celtic people of Europe and all of their gold was plundered by the Romans during the time of the lives of the 12 Caesars. So
they took all the gold from there. Also, if you'll look at history, they came in and fought with these guys right about the time of Christ, and what actually ends up being what's known as Armageddon itself, where Jesus Christ at 33 AD said 1 generation, or 40 years biblically, that this thing would happen where the temple would be knocked down and it would be the abomination of desolation. And in 73 AD was the end of the war. There was 7 years of the trials and tribulations. Started in 66 AD in the 6th month on the 6th day, and I think people can probably put that together for you and this ancient idea that it happened. But if you look at the giant arches they have there, they show you where they took all the stuff out of the temple and had brought it up and had taken it to there, and they used that to help build the Colosseum and a lot of what you see in Rome today whenever we go look at the artifacts that are there. But let's continue.
Of the Celtic gold that the Romans had stolen from the Celtic people in Europe, they took it back to Rome and melted it down in Roman melting pots. So Strabo also describes that the territory of the Celtics was also called Celtica, and it included the Alps and the very high mountains. So we have many writers and historians and ancient philosophers and geographers who have written about the Celtic people. More importantly, they have called them the Sumerians, and we know that the Sumerians were Cushites. And this shows us that the same Cushites who were inhabiting Africa and the Middle East 3,000 years ago were also inhabiting all of Europe 3,000 years ago as well.
Yep, these ancient primordial Caucasians that are pretty much from the Bible or the biblical concept, and how it had all spread out, and how civilization had spread out, and it seemed to begin somehow in Sumer, and you have Sumerians and Cimmerians and Samaria and the Good Samaritan, and then that linguistic thing is changed, though there's a lot of Proto-Indo-European linguistics that carry all the way from Ireland to India itself, pater and father, and all of these words that show ancient connections, and then art and ancient connections. But the weird oddity here, and it's even shown in here, is that ancient Peru has connections that show the same situation. And I'm telling you that the ziggurats and the pyramids of the Aztecs and Mayans have more, definitely more, in congress with each other and in common with each other than people are willing to give any credence to the idea of at this point. But it's slowly, a veil is slowly lifting, and hopefully I'm helping to lift it somewhat.
So the last thing that I want to show you is that if you look to the right, these are artifacts that were found in Tutankhamen's tomb. And you can see the boat, which resembles a Viking boat.
Yeah, so you see this boat here, and it's found in Tutankhamen's tomb. She could have done this much better. But, yeah, so this is his stanza, and then on it, it's standing on top of Negroids that they had taken over in his little box that's right over here in the picture book. Shows him trampling Negroids with a chariot carried by what looks like a parade pony. And I've shown just in the recent videos I have of this cabin that's on this high swayed Sumerian boat, and that end up having head resting onto them. And this, of course, is in a time of Aries and the goats and stuff that are on here. Before that are bulls and so on, and bull horns. And that's where it ends up coming out to where you get this effigies too of this high proud boats that are seen with the Vikings also. And it goes back to Sumerian reed boats from ancient primordial times. Even the idea of this flying bird and this winged disc that is in Mithra, that is in Sumerians, and you find it on their ancient rolled out cylinder seals, which you still find cylinder seals at the very starting of Egypt, but they disappear shortly after. And this concept that's there with this winged disc, and a lot of other symbology that's all shown, that shows connections.
And according to white people, this is an old Viking boat from Europe. So, who were the Vikings?
According to white people, this is an old Viking boat from Europe. What, like, oh, there's some mystery to it? No, so who were the Vikings? The Vikings were Caucasoids, and they were pretty much an offshoot of the Phoenicians and a primordial Celtic people that had lived up in the north of Britain and so on, and into Scandinavia and the Scandinavians and things. And they all had ancient primordial trade with each other. The one thing that didn't connect anywhere is sub-Saharan Africans didn't connect to any of this. The only ones that did were Nubians, and they weren't allowed into Egypt. And for a long, long time. And what we think of as Ethiopia today is not Ethiopia of the ancients and what the word was made for in the first place. And yeah, it's kind of sad to see black people try to grip onto anything but their own heritage and say they were involved with a lot of other people, which is easily debunked. But when you put it together like this, it shows a unity of these Caucasians and how they did bring forth humanity.
So if you look to the right, you'll see an ancient Babylonian boat.
Actually, if we look to the right, we're not finding an ancient Babylonian boat. Oh my God, she's trying to say this. This is actually a liar, right? She's a liar, and this is a liar, or this is a musical instrument. This is from Ur, and that's the little bullhead that's on the front of it. And this is like a giant harp, or a version of the harps and lyres that they had before. And here again with the symbology of the triad, the dragons, and so on. And yeah, this is Sumerian and the ring of deity and things like that. And that's not a boat though, but yeah, okay.
Into 4500 BC. So this was 6,500 years old.
Yep.
So the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Cushites both had these Viking-style boats 6,500 years ago. So
yep, they definitely did. And it's whites, it's Caucasian people, it's these pale people that you just can't seem to stand that actually are spacemen now. And they brought flight and technology and the computer that you're on now and electricity and everything that goes along with it.
Modern movies and television series always depict the ancient Vikings as being white.
Yeah, of course.
But this is an inaccurate depiction of the ancient Vikings.
No, that's a lie. That's very much a jealous lie right there. The Vikings were and always will be Caucasians. You're not going to go back and change history. You can only try to deal with what you have. And if what you have is not much, you're not going to steal from other people. That's kind of disgusting. And we're watching it attempt to happen. And it's kind of a weird grasping for things. And it's not really socially acceptable. It's racist as hell to sit and lie on all these primordial cultures that we're all Caucasians, to try to steal the fact and say that, oh, black people was them too. Well, the West Africans of the slave trade have no relation to any of these people, and therefore we're still left where we were before. If we find 10 cultures of incredible black people, the West Africans of the slave trade weren't those people. They're not a part of the Bible either. They try to weasel in on things, but it's not reality. And she finished off a great showing of history here with a lie. But it seems like she only lied 3 times in it. Once early she said there were black people, once in the middle, and then once here at the end, trying to tell you that the Vikings were somehow black people and that the black people were Sumerians, Egyptians, and all of this stuff. And it's really kind of disgusting.
And if we want to see a more accurate depiction of what the Vikings or the Celts look like, or the ancient inhabitants of Europe, all we have to do is look at all of the evidence that these black civilizations left behind.
There are no black civilizations. This is a Caucasian with his little skinny lips. Let's continue to look here. This is Darius the Aryan fighting against, guess who? Yeah. So now we have the Macedonian great prince coming down through here and fighting against them. Well, who are they? They're Caucasians. Yeah. So, yeah, and who were all these ancient Scythians and so on, and England's heritage and everything, and Caucasians. And who are the ancient Sumerians and the Aryans of Sumer? Caucasian. It's the cities of Eden. That's where the Bible comes from. And it doesn't involve black people. Here, let's look at one more thing here. Let's see. Uh, Showed you Caucasians were all the way up into the Horn of Africa in the last one, but let's just Google image something. Let's do that. Let's Google image blue-eyed gods. See what shows up with that. Because there's a lot of these blue-eyed gods. Let's look up images. Wow, one of those is my video. So, they're in Egypt, they're in Sumer, they're in Peru, they're everywhere. These are the ancient Sumerians, right here. These are Caucasians with blue eyes. This is the ancient ones. You will not be lying on them. Yep, white Sumerians. They're the real first people right there. The real origin. That's them. Right there. Look at all these Sumerians with their blue eyes. Yep, it's definitely there. Buddha? Yeah, Buddha is said to be a blue eye. There's blue-eyed gods all over South America. Ones that have beards whenever South Americans don't grow beards. But you see all the beards here, and even Egypt growing beards, and the blue-eyed Egyptians. You know, everybody gets freaky over Nefertiti, and she has one blue eye left at least. The other one fell out. And then you look at the ancient blonde mummies that are seen here from Peru, and then whenever they thought that Pizarro was the Viracocha, and these are the actual ones that they had taken from there, and they're blonde-haired. They told them that they were the children of the gods. Yep, blue-eyed mummies. And then they still find them to this day. It's ancient Wari culture, and these blue-eyed mummies that are all over Peru, right here. Wari kingdom, right here. Yep, 800 AD. So, amazing. They're around then. They're around now. Ancient Celts. People had tattoos, all kinds of stuff. The tattooed sailor. Where is this guy? Well, it's a red-headed Maori guy. What? Yep. So how about the Maoris and their tattoos? Well, that's for another video. But, so you can see this ancient Aryan stock of people and the ancient stuff still inside these people to this day, even though there's a lot of admix that there is there now. And even of the most ancient of Egyptians, going back 3rd, 4th, and 5th dynasty, where there are blue eyes and blue-eyed scribes and blue-eyed Caucasians. This is Egypt. They have blonde hair, red hair, blonde hair and red hair, Caucasian hair. Whenever they look at it under a microscope, they're all Caucasians. You find a similarity where they have this winged sun disk between ancient nobility of Sumer and the Egyptians. These two posts become the snakes. It is the same symbology. And here we have the blue-eyed Egyptians and the blue-eyed Sumerians, which I've shown ancient connections to. And there are no connections to the ancient Negroids. They weren't even allowed into Egypt itself. You find Mongol leaders like Genghis Khan himself was listed as a blue-eyed person, and you find the ancient Tocharians that are wearing silk clothing in a Persian style way up in China with these ancient mummies and burial with blonde hair and blue eyes. Made a few videos about it recently, so funny that it would show up something like this, they would try to say. But oddly enough, Xenophanes tells you that Ethiopians imagine their gods as black and sub-nosed, Thracians blue-eyed and red hair, but if horses or lions had hands, or could draw or fashion works as men do, horses would draw the gods shaped like horses and lions like lions, making the gods resemble themselves. But one thing that you shouldn't do is covet and make false images of God. That's definitely been found to be a bad thing. And one more connection here too. this is that Horus god, but this is in Sumeria, and there's your start of the Shimsu Hor that come. But then again, this is found in South America. So there's a lot of things that go with each other and that show ancient connections of all these Proto-Indo-Europeans that led into what current mankind is. And even old ancient pictures of like Brahma man, where they've done recreations, and you can definitely see this is somebody who looks very much European today. In ancient times, even the DNA and genetics show that they're quite the same and genetic wise as they were, and people threw fits over gods and exoduses and how it had showed some Caucasians there, and they're white people. Well, that's white. Look at his skin. It's not white. In fact, if he's out in the sun a little longer, it'll be that dark, and when it's that dark, that's the color of the Egyptians on the wall. And red ochre is a symbology that goes back in Caucasians all the way back to Cro-Magnon times and prior to that. And again, just to show you again, when Pizarro came down, they found these people that had ancient blonde hair, and the locals thought that they were the gods that returned because they had blue eyes and a beard, and they thought that they were the gods. Well, he found a few that were blonde. He said, "Who are they?" And they said, "They're the last of the children of the gods." And so what does that mean? In these Moshe statues, and Moshe is the name of Moses, by the way, but Moshe statues, and they have these beards and these Caucasoids that bring humanity into an Incan culture. Very strange how you can make all these connections. Quite a few connections. But the one connection you can't make is trying to say that any of these cultures were actually Negroids. Look at ancient Aryan cultures, and now they have the swastikas to them. And it can go all the way back to Göbekli Tepe in times in Catalhoyuk, and all the way till modern times today. And all of their versions of swastikas, and all of these blue-eyed people that brought forth humanity. Anyhow, like, share, and subscribe before we go, guys. But that's about it on this. But yeah, there's just connections that are shown there. It's really pretty much an easier, a mull over type thing, where we just look at it and she's easily able to see these connections. But the sad thing is she says, well, I want one of them to be black. All of them are black. Everybody's black. And it's a problem that we have in modern society, where they're really not satisfied with their own history, and so they want to steal somebody else's, and it causes a racism by their own hands. If you think about it, they actually get all mad about it, and it's a lie, a jealous lie, and so they cause their own racism by their own hands, while the world stares on like, really? Anyhow, peace, guys.